Welcome to Starbound, where every star tells a story. Have you ever pondered what it's like to be the last human alive, waking up in a world now owned by aliens? Let's get into the story. Darkness was all-encompassing. No sound, no sensation, not even the familiar thrum of machinery that had accompanied his cryogenic slumber. It felt different this time, deeper, heavier. Then came the needle. The pain shot him awake, a surge of adrenaline coursing through veins long dormant. His vision blurred, colors swirling in a sickening kaleidoscope. Then, slowly, shapes began to form. Lights, harsh and clinical. Grotesque faces hovering above, their features twisted in a mixture of curiosity and a cruel, predatory hunger. Harold King, Sergeant First Class, didn't need an instruction manual to understand the situation. The restraints, the alien faces, the unfamiliar thrumming of alien technology all screamed one word: hostile. But the grogginess of cryo-sleep still clung to him, dulling his reactions and blurring his usually razor-sharp focus. He struggled against the bonds, testing their strength. They held for now, but he didn't doubt that a true surge of adrenaline could snap those cuffs like twigs. Yet, something nagged at him. If he was a prisoner, why revive him? "Remarkable," one of the creatures rasped in a clicking, guttural language. "Still functional after all this time. Primitive, yes, but resilient." Another creature tittered, its elongated tusks glinting under the harsh lights. Its eyes gleamed with a malice that made Harold's blood run cold. Whatever plans they had for him, nothing good would come of them. Harold knew his reputation. They didn't make men like him for tea parties. "Specimen," another rasped, its multiple eyes focusing on him. "You are the last of your kind." Harold strained against his restraints, a growl bubbling up from the depths of him. "Last? You mean—" His words stuck in his throat. All those faces, names, the familiar scent of ozone and gunpowder. Were they really gone? "Extinct," the clicking creature confirmed. "And do not think to escape, muscle-bound ape. We have studied your kind for centuries. Your primitive weapons could not save you, and neither will this feeble defiance." Feeble. The word struck a nerve. It was the word his enemies, his human enemies, had used only to be torn apart for their arrogance. Harold was a weapon, honed and forged in desperation during humanity's darkest hour. Even frozen, even in a world ravaged beyond recognition, he was still more dangerous than these tusked scavengers could ever comprehend. They were prodding a sleeping bear. It was time to wake up. A jolt went through Harold, less the lingering effects of the cryo solution and more a surge of pure rage. In that single word, extinct, the creature had spat on the graves of his brothers and sisters in arms. On the sacrifices they had made, buying time for people like him to sleep. Time, it seems, had been wasted. "Extinct," he echoed, his voice a rasp from disuse. Then a chuckle wormed its way out, growing into a harsh laugh. He tested his bindings again, this time feeling the leather creak. "You idiots don't know anything about us. You weren't there. You didn't see what we could do." The creature with the tusks leaned closer, its beady eyes filled with amusement rather than fear. "We have your technology, primitive. Your weapons, your armor. It is impressive, yes, but not enough. Our fleet is vast, and your precious Earth," it sneered, "well, let's just say it belongs to us now." Earth. The word hit Harold like a physical blow. Home. Images of rolling green hills and glittering cities flooded his mind. Were they really gone? Replaced by squatting alien structures? The rage boiled hotter, and as if echoing the fire in his gut, the restraint snapped. The Grethan recoiled with a shrill yelp, surprise distorting their ugly features. Harold surged forward, the motion still clumsy and slow, but his raw power more than compensated. He grabbed one of the aliens, its clicking hisses turning into gurgles as he lifted it effortlessly. With a strength born of fury, he slammed it against the metal wall, then another and another. Alarms blared, filling the sterile room with shrill noise. Red lights flashed, painting the chaos with an apocalyptic hue. Harold roared, not a war cry or command, but the primal scream of a man who had lost everything and had absolutely nothing left to lose. Footsteps pounded down the corridors as Grethan reinforcements arrived. Their weapons hummed, flashing with unknown energy, but these scavengers, these parasites, had become complacent in their superiority. Their weapons might have felled a normal human, but Harold wasn't merely human. He was the distilled essence of humanity's desperate struggle to survive. A beam of sickly green light struck him in the chest. It stung, and he roared again, more in defiance than pain. He staggered but didn't fall. His eyes swept the chamber, seeking an escape route, a weapon, anything. He was a one-man army, fueled by the ghosts of the past, and he was just getting started. More beams struck him, some finding their mark, others intercepted by his flailing, thick-muscled limbs. He felt heat bloom under his skin, but it only pushed the fury up another notch. He was built for this. They had awakened a weapon they thought they could control, a prehistoric relic they could dissect and conquer. The Grethen, initially disoriented by this unexpected brutality, began to find their rhythm. They moved as a unit now, aiming, firing, but still they could not stop his relentless advance. With every step, bits of the sterile room yielded. A wall panel buckled under his fist, a console smashed into sparking pieces. These aliens, with their scavenged tech and their disdain for humanity, were about to receive a brutal education. One of the Grethen, bolder or perhaps more foolish than the others, tried to tackle Harold. It was a laughably futile maneuver. He caught the creature mid-leap, its wiry body snapping with sickening ease. With a roar that rattled the room, he hurled its corpse into the advancing horde, scattering them like bowling pins. They hesitated, re-evaluating. Harold used the momentary lull to scan his surroundings. There, amidst the chaos he had wrought, was a rack of confiscated weapons. They were not human, but they were weapons nonetheless. He charged, thick arms shielding him from further blasts, and reached the rack. The weapons were unlike anything he knew, their design a twisted mix of organic curves and cold metal. Instinct and experience took over. He hefted one, feeling its unexpected weight distribution, its humming core. This wasn't a gun, it was something more potent. Its energy pulsed against his palm like a malevolent heartbeat. A trio of Grethen, having recovered their nerve, charged him. He leveled the alien weapon. A searing beam of light burst forth, not the neat laser blast he had expected, but a wild, arcing torrent of energy. Two of the aliens disintegrated in a flash, their shrieks cut short. The third, its hide scorched, retreated with a wail of terror. Harold, breathing heavily, surveyed the wreckage. The thrill of combat faded, replaced by a creeping sense of horror. The room, once ordered and sterile, was a canvas of chaos. Twisted metal, alien bodies, and the acrid scent of ozone and burned flesh. He wasn't just a super soldier. He was a force of nature, a walking apocalypse these scavengers had unwittingly unleashed upon themselves. But as he absorbed the carnage, a new resolve grew within him. They'd said humanity was extinct, Earth taken. He didn't know if it was true, but he owed it to the memory of all he had lost to find out. It was time to turn the tables, time for the hunted to become the hunter. A sudden wave of exhaustion washed over Harold. Cryo-sleep was a taxing process, and the burst of violence had pushed his body beyond its current limits. Still, he couldn't afford to rest. Who knew what reinforcements their alarms were summoning? He needed information, a plan. Staggering towards the nearest intact console, he began smashing through its alien interface. The glyphs and symbols were a maddening puzzle, but he was used to working under pressure. He wasn't looking for technical manuals. He wanted ship schematics, crew manifests, anything that could lead him to answers. Just as despair began to gnaw at him, he struck gold. A navigational chart of their current sector appeared, pulsating with markers and labels. One in particular made his heart both plummet and surge with hope. Sol. It was still marked, not with the bustling beacon of a living planet, but as a historical site, a graveyard. That settled it. He was going home, even if it was only to leave flowers on a tomb. His hunt for information wasn't fruitless, though. Through a combination of frustrated smashes and trial and error, he pinpointed the room that seemed to be a command center. If anyone knew more about humanity's fate, it would be the officers on board. It was a long shot, but desperation was a hell of a motivator. Another important find was a sealed alcove near the far wall, a weapons locker, or perhaps an armory. The door, smooth and devoid of any obvious control panel, seemed impervious. Harold slammed a fist against the unyielding surface. "Just more of your fancy scavenged tech," he hissed, his words as much directed at his unseen captors as at the stubborn door. If there was one thing he had learned during humanity's darkest hours, it was that alien weapons, no matter how advanced, were built with weaknesses. The weapons in the alien ship were designed for creatures with multiple appendages, thinner fingers, and a different physiology, meant to be wielded gracefully, not with the brute force that was his hallmark. He scrutinized every inch of the door, not looking for a hidden sensor, but for a structural flaw he could exploit. Then he saw it. A barely noticeable line, a hairline fracture along the bottom edge of the door. Had their scavenged goods been damaged during transport? Or perhaps there was a maintenance access point they thought well hidden, a chink in the armor of their arrogance. Harold pressed a finger against the seam, applying pressure. Nothing. Fueled by adrenaline and stubborn defiance, he slammed his shoulder into the door. It buckled slightly, giving him a flicker of hope. He struck it again and again, the impact jarring his aching muscles. Finally, with a groan of protesting metal, the seam widened, and he managed to pry his fingers inside. He pulled with all his might, and the door screeched in protest, eventually tearing loose with a rush of pressurized air. The armory was a treasure trove, not of human weapons, sadly, but of scavenged gear gleaned from fallen enemies of the Grethen. There would be something here to even the odds, if he could only figure out how to use it. Time was no longer his ally. The echoes of his rampage surely reverberated through the vessel. He could almost hear the boots of converging Grethen forces racing to intercept the escaped specimen. He wouldn't get another chance like this. The armory's shelves were an eclectic mix of weaponry. There were blades, intricately carved, clearly not designed for the rough handling he favored. Energy projectors were present, some similar to what he'd wrestled free earlier, but each had variations that would take too long to test. He needed something familiar, intuitive, something to channel his raw aggression. His gaze fell upon a heavy, bulky contraption that stood out against the delicate curves of the other weapons. It resembled an oversized gauntlet, crafted from plates of thick, overlapping metal. There was a brutal elegance to it, a reminder of the old siege engines of human history, designed for one purpose: to shatter defenses. With renewed haste, he moved towards the gauntlet, its weight settling surprisingly well in his grip. It felt both foreign and instantly familiar, like holding a jackhammer rather than a sword. Mechanisms within the contraption whirred into life as he slid it onto his arm, hydraulics hissing as it adjusted to his anatomy. A flick of his wrist sent a piston-powered fist crashing into an empty shelf, reducing it to splinters. A feral grin spread across Harold's face. This he could work with. He scanned the room once more, this time looking not for weapons, but supplies. A thick bandolier of what looked like grenades caught his eye. Hefting a handful, he found them surprisingly familiar in design, their operation likely echoing his own ancient frag grenades. A wave of nostalgia washed over him for a moment. At least some things remained universal, even amidst the ruins of Earth and the rise of aliens' empires. Before leaving, he paused. His own reflection stared back from the glossy, polished metal of a nearby case. He looked wild, unkempt, eyes sunken with exhaustion but burning with a dangerous light. They had made a mistake, these Grethen, reviving him. But now he was no longer merely a relic. He was a weapon, honed and ready, and they were about to find out exactly what kind of war humanity was capable of. Leaving the armory, he stalked the steel corridors of the Grethen vessel. It was a hunter's prowl now, measured, silent. He would need to find the command center, and there he would find the answers, or more likely, tear them from the throats of his captors. They had made him a ghost of the past. Now he was going to haunt their future. Harold moved with uncanny stealth for a man of his size. The power thrumming from the gauntlet gave his steps a deceptive lightness. The ship's design, though alien, provided him with a battlefield he partially understood. Corridors formed choke points, branching maintenance shafts offering hidden paths. He remembered basic principles of warfare, lessons hammered into him during training that transcended language and technology. The Grethen, initially caught off guard, were beginning to rally. Shrill clicks and hisses echoed through the intercom system, a panicked attempt at organization after the initial shock. Groups of aliens now patrolled the corridors, weapons raised and eyes wide with a mix of fear and a steel resolution. It wouldn't be enough. The first patrol made the fatal mistake of underestimating their target. Seeing a lumbering, solitary human, they assumed it would be an easy repeat of their initial capture. They charged, weapons trilling with the promise of an easy kill. Harold met their charge with a roar that drowned out the sound of their weapons. The gauntlet pulverized. Where Grethan armor held against their own energy blasts, it crumpled under the hydraulic fist. Bones snapped, bodies flew like they were swatted by an angry giant. The survivors, their bravado shattered, turned and fled. Harold didn't pursue. There was no need. That display of power would ripple through their ranks, spreading terror with far more efficiency than any chase he could manage. His path led him inevitably towards the command center. The ship hummed and throbbed around him, almost as if it were recoiling from the presence of its reawakened guest. Access panels shimmered with warnings he ignored. Bulkheads groaned as their locking mechanisms strained, likely trying to seal off this section entirely under orders from the panicking command crew. Too little. Far too late. He crashed through the command center doors, the reinforced metal buckling like tinfoil against the fury of the gauntlet. The room before him was a chaos of flashing consoles and scurrying aliens, all dominated by a massive view screen showing the vastness of space, punctuated by their destination. Sol system. Harold surveyed the scene with cold calculation. The officers were distinguishable by their elaborate head crests and ornate weapons. They would be the keepers of the knowledge he sought. But with his sudden, violent entrance, the room had become a killing ground. A surge of Grettan guards, emboldened or perhaps simply terrified of what awaited them if they retreated, charged. They died in a flurry of pulverized metal and splattered viscera. The gauntlet wasn't a weapon of precision. It was an instrument of annihilation. With the immediate threat neutralized, the command center was an island of terrified confusion. Grethan officers huddled behind overturned consoles, their clicks and whistles replaced by whimpers and desperate attempts to scramble away from the carnage. Harold advanced, his footfalls booming against the floor, each step punctuated by another dying alien. He stopped before a creature larger than the others, its head crest gleaming with oily sweat. It held a strange, ornate device, a weapon far more intricate than those of the dead guards. Harold assumed this was the captain, or whatever equivalent commanded this vessel. It raised its weapon, shaking. "Wait!" It rasped in unexpectedly passable English. "Stop. Please. We can talk." Harold paused. He hadn't expected that. Perhaps this was the break he needed, a source of information far more efficient than tearing it from a corpse. He lowered his guard, the gauntlet's hum subsiding as the pistons relaxed. "Talk?" he growled, his voice still strained and rough. "Start with this. What happened to Earth?" The alien captain gulped. "It was before my time. Centuries, long ago. We found it barren, ruined." He gestured helplessly with its free limb. "The technology, so much, the records. We took what we could to help, to build." "Bullshit," Harold snarled, the fury flaring once more. "You vultures picked my planet clean." Fear gave way to a strange glimmer in the Grethan's multifaceted eyes. "Not clean. You, specimen. Your kind. We found capsules, cryo, thousands, millions maybe. But only you were functional." This time it was Harold who went still. Millions. The last hope, the hidden seeds of humanity, hibernating while the planet recovered, ready to reemerge. Were they still there? Was there even a planet to return to? The rage simmered, replaced by a cold, chilling dread. The captain, seeing an advantage, pressed on. "We can help, specimen. Your kind is strong. We offered a pact. Technology, alliance. We found worlds suitable. Can bring more of your kind. Start again." Harold weighed the alien's words. A lifeline, a temptation, and likely a trap. But with Earth's fate uncertain and the potential of others surviving, he couldn't afford to dismiss any option, no matter how unsavory. "Let's hear this proposal of yours," he said slowly, keeping the gauntlet primed but at his side. The war was far from over. It had simply moved into a new, even more dangerous phase. A shaky calm descended upon the command center. Bodies of dead Grethan littered the floor, a defying testament to Harold's capability for destruction. The surviving crew members stayed huddled in their hiding spots, their eyes fixated on the human specimen. The captain, its arrogance now replaced by a cautious, desperate pragmatism, stood a few paces away, a strange kind of negotiation table. "Firstly," the alien rasped, "you must cease this rampage. My crew, they are needed to pilot this vessel, to bring us," it swallowed, "to suitable locations." Harold studied the creature. This wasn't merely surrender, it was a calculated risk. The Grethin needed him, needed his dormant brethren as much as he needed information from them. For the first time since awakening, he felt the barest flicker of something resembling control. "Let's make this clear," Harold said, his voice thick with menace. "You work for me now. One order disobeyed, one sign of treachery, and your precious ship and everything on it becomes space dust. Understand?" The alien captain gave a hesitant nod. Its eyes shifted around the room, likely assessing the damage, calculating their chances. Harold knew the Grethin were cowards at heart. They thrived on overwhelming odds and scavenged victories. This was uncharted territory for them. "I offer you 3 things," Harold continued. 1, you take me to Earth immediately. 2, you begin the revival process for anyone in cryosleep on this ship. 3, you provide a full technological and tactical breakdown of everything you've stolen from my people. A flicker of surprise, maybe even fear, crossed the captain's features. "Revive, but they may be like you. Dangerous." "That's my problem," Harold cut in. "And you underestimate how dangerous I can be if you don't do exactly as I say." The alien hesitated, but only briefly, the potential benefits of compliance outweighing the perceived threat. "Very well, specimen. We will comply. For now." The last word hung unspoken, a promise of future conflict that Harold wasn't naive enough to ignore. This alliance was a fragile, potentially poisonous thing, but it was his only chance, and for the sake of humanity, extinct or hidden, he'd dance with the devil himself. With a curt nod, Harold signaled his understanding. He was no admiral, but he understood command structure. "Get your crew back in order. Set course for Earth, and I want those cryopods prepped, now." The Grethin officers emerged from their makeshift bunkers, clicking out hesitant orders. This ship, its crew, its plundered technology, these were now his tools. The hunter had become the hunted, and Harold intended to squeeze every bit of information and advantage he could from them before the inevitable moment when this alliance would shatter, likely in a storm of blood and fire. But for now, there was a faint flicker of hope. Perhaps humanity wasn't as extinct as those scavengers believed. Perhaps he wasn't alone. The Grethin ship shuddered as it changed course, the distant blue and brown planet that was Earth, growing larger in the view screen. Harold watched, a storm of conflicting emotions battling within him. Excitement warred with trepidation, and beneath it all thrummed an icy cold realization that Earth had changed. He'd barter with vile aliens. He'd even fight alongside them, if it meant a slim chance for the survival of his people. The command center, once a bastion of Grethin arrogance, was now transformed. Dead were cleared, stations were manned by a mix of fearful Grethin and grim-faced humans. It wasn't many, just a handful of super soldiers like Harold revived from their crystalline tombs. Rough around the edges, still weak from cryosleep, but in their eyes burned the familiar fire that had carried humanity through its darkest hours. They were a motley crew, men and women from different eras of the last great war. There was a pilot, her fingers dancing over an alien console with surprising dexterity, a tactician studying star charts, muttering strategic possibilities, and a hulking demolitions expert inspecting the Grethin armory with unconcealed glee. It wasn't an army, not yet, but it was a start. Harold, utilizing his superior strength and the fear his rampage had instilled, began to impose order. He wouldn't let these precious few be squandered as they were meant to lead, not merely be shock troops. He began with simple tasks, building teamwork, restoring a military mindset. Earth's fate was still unknown, but if there was a battle to be fought, they would be ready. Technology was both a gift and a curse. His soldiers, veterans though they were overwhelmed by the Grethin weapons and ships. Harold himself struggled, but he saw potential, brutal potential, if they could master these alien systems. Their first goal was turning the plundered weapons of humanity against their captors. If and when this alliance fell apart, as it surely would, he wanted his team to be the apex predators, not bewildered prey. The Grethan captain, ever watchful, observed this transformation with growing unease. It understood the volatile fuel it had poured back into the dying embers of humanity. Yet it still clung to the desperate hope that perhaps these fierce humans could be controlled, their aggression turned outward. The galaxy was a brutal place, and a warrior race might give the Grethan the edge they craved. Days stretched into tense weeks. Earth grew ever closer, a scarred jewel against the black velvet of space. Reports from scouts sent ahead were hopeless. Ruins, massive craters, radiation signatures, all signs of a devastating war. But amidst the desolation, faint energy spikes flickered, proof that some human technology remained. Whatever he would find on Earth, Harold knew one thing. His war, humanity's war, was far from over. The ship breached Earth's ravaged atmosphere, the planet's wounded surface filling the view screen. Harold stood rigid, his eyes tracing the scarred landscape, seeking any flicker of familiar topography, of the world he had been created to defend. Yet, all he saw were desolate plains, skeletal remains of cities, and the ominous craters that hinted at a war fought on an apocalyptic scale. His soldiers had gathered behind him, a mixture of somber reflection and defiant fire in their eyes. It was clear that even the hardened veterans among them were unprepared for this level of devastation. Here was not the home they had left behind, but a graveyard, a chilling reminder of the price paid for their frozen slumber. As the Grethan ship settled, cautiously navigating the unpredictable pockets of radiation and debris, the airlock hissed open. Harold was the first to set foot on Earth in centuries. With a deep breath, he took in the stale, radiation-tinged air. It tasted of death, of desolation, but there was a sharp undercurrent to it, a stubborn resilience that reminded him of the weeds that forced their way through concrete. The captain materialized beside him, along with a heavily armed escort. "Specimen, we've detected the readings. Underground. It appears your people... some survived." Harold didn't need confirmation. He could feel it in the very soil beneath his boots. An echo of humanity, weakened but defiantly still alive. He turned to the captain, a hardened determination in his eyes. "Let's go see what's left of my people." Behind him, his soldiers formed up, a stark silhouette against the ruined world. If the aliens thought this trek was merely an archaeological foray, they had sorely miscalculated. Every single one of Harold's hand-picked team was primed for war, every step infused with the weight of potential extinction. The hidden entrance was a testament to his people's ingenuity. A massive crater, partially filled by shifting sands, concealed a network of tunnels, shielded from the worst of the radiation. The Grethan, driven by a mix of curiosity and avarice, led them down the claustrophobic passages, their weapons held high. The bunker itself was a desolate testament to survival. It was built for function, not comfort, its inhabitants clinging to life amidst the bleak reality of their ruined world. Power was limited, supplies were scarce, and the people who emerged from the shadows were gaunt and pale, their eyes shadowed by constant vigilance. But they were alive, and when they saw Harold and the soldiers at his back, a spark of recognition, followed by a surge of defiant hope, spread through the room. Harold stepped forward, the echoes of his footsteps loud in the stunned silence. "I'm Sergeant Harold King," he declared, his voice thick with emotion. "And I don't know what war you fought or how you survived, but the war isn't over. Not by a long shot." The silence broke, replaced by gasps, ragged cheers, and finally, the thunderous roar of a people who had stared extinction in the face and refused to blink. The aliens were forgotten, shoved aside by a tide of desperate, hopeful humanity. Harold, seasoned soldier that he was, felt tears welling in his own eyes. This was more than simply finding survivors. He'd brought an army, a flicker of revenge, and with it, the wild, impossible hope that humanity might just rise from its own ashes. The roar of the bunker crowd faded, replaced by a tense buzz as questions, suspicions, and desperate plans swirled in the air. The Grethan looked on with growing disquiet. They had brought predators to a den of survivors, and the scent of fear had ignited something dangerous. Harold, his heart pounding with an emotion stronger than rage, moved through the crowd. These were his people, battered but unbowed. There were civilians, engineers, scientists, a motley mix of anyone who had been deemed essential for the grand plan of cryo-sleep and rebuilding. but the desperation in their eyes told him they had become fighters too. A woman, her face lined with both age and an enduring determination, pushed her way to the front. "Sergeant," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "we knew the day would come when someone was revived, but—" She gestured at the Grethin. "Never like this." Harold nodded grimly. "Desperate times," he agreed. "Now I need the situation on the ground ASAP. What happened? Who are we fighting?" As the bunker's leader stepped forward to begin the briefing, Harold noted the Grethin were edging out. The captain, though clearly rattled, still carried itself with an air of predatory calculation. No doubt plans were already forming, the question now being whether escape or conquest would be more profitable. He signaled to his closest comrades, and a silent ring of wary soldiers surrounded the aliens, weapons half raised. The next hours were a whirlwind of grim reports. The war that had ravaged Earth was one of attrition rather than a single apocalyptic event. In humanity's absence, petty empires formed, squabbling for resources and technology. The Grethin were merely the most successful of these scavenging factions, but others existed like vultures picking at a corpse. Harold listened, his mind a battlefield as he analyzed the threats, the strengths, and the pitifully few resources left at their disposal. He was a soldier, not a politician, but even he understood the fragile nature of this situation. Humanity was a dying ember, and the Grethin were both kerosene and a stiff wind. "We have weapons," a grizzled engineer insisted. "Experimental ones, hidden away, never used because we didn't have the power, the manpower." He trailed off, looking hopefully at Harold and the soldiers. An unholy light sparked in Harold's eyes. "Not anymore, we don't," he muttered, the grin on his face more dangerous than a snarl. "Captain," he addressed the Grethin leader, feigning civility, "it seems our partnership will continue. Your crew will assist my people in utilizing these—" He paused for effect. "Weapons of mass destruction." Chaos erupted. The Grethin captain hissed and spat, but its weapons were no match for the hardened, desperate humans now surrounding them. The survivors of the bunker buzzed with a volatile mix of shock and grim satisfaction. They had dreamed of vengeance, but even the most optimistic among them hadn't dared picture this. As the Grethin were herded away, reluctantly put to work by humans with newfound steel in their spines, Harold finally let himself exhale. It was a gamble, a horrific one, but the flicker of hope that had been sputtering in the bunker was now ablaze. He would build an army, harness the fury of extinction, and make every damned scavenger in the galaxy regret the day they ever picked a fight with humanity. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. The transformation was as swift as it was unsettling. The bunker, once a bastion of desperate survival, became a churning war machine. Grethin technicians, under constant armed guard, toiled alongside human engineers, their expertise grudgingly extracted. Experimental weapons, fueled by scavenged technology and a touch of mad science, were resurrected. These were not the refined, precise tools of humanity's prime, but cobbled together monstrosities, capable of both awe-inspiring power and unpredictable instability. Harold became both general and drill sergeant. He whipped the surviving civilians and scientists into fighting shape, the harshness of his methods tempered by their shared desperation. It was a brutal rebirth. Farmers learning to pilot strange vehicles scavenged from Grethin arsenals, researchers becoming deadly bomb technicians, all bound by their iron will to not simply survive, but to dominate. The Grethin grew increasingly uneasy, their initial superiority dissolving in the face of humanity's single-minded fury. Every day more of their crew defected, disappearing into the bunker's shadows, their knowledge adding another sliver of advantage to Harold's growing arsenal. The captain made threats, veiled and otherwise, but Harold merely smiled chillingly, showcasing a devastating new energy cannon that turned a practice target into a molten crater. The first strike, when it came, wasn't an invasion or an interstellar battle, but a heist. Harold's hand-picked squad, utilizing their enhanced strength and a lifetime of combat experience, infiltrated a minor Grethin outpost. Their target wasn't mere destruction, but information. The team swept through with ruthless efficiency, leaving a trail of dismembered aliens and shattered consoles in their wake. They returned with treasures more valuable than gold, There were detailed schematics of Grethan vessels, communication frequencies, and best of all, a star map pinpointing other scavenging operations in nearby systems. It was a starting point, a way to turn hunters into prey. Within weeks, Harold launched his counteroffensive. It was not a glorious charge, but a series of brutal, targeted strikes. Small, human-crewed ships, armed with prototype weapons of terrifying power, slipped into weakly guarded systems. Enemy outposts were reduced to glowing rubble, supply depots vanished in blinding flashes, and stolen vessels were reclaimed. Each victory was a needle to inflate humanity's broken spirit, a grim overture to the apocalyptic symphony yet to come. Panic coursed through the Grethan Empire. The apes, the primitives, were not merely fighting back. They were fighting with intelligence and an unnerving savagery. Reinforcements were scattered, communication lines sabotaged, and fear bloomed amidst even the most hardened Grethan. Harold was both orchestrator and blunt instrument in the unfolding war. He led from the front, utilizing his monstrous power alongside the terrifying weapons his people had built. But he was also a strategist now, dissecting intercepted intelligence reports, identifying weak points in the enemy's scattered empire. He saw the potential for fracturing their alliances, for turning rivals into enemies, and turning the tide of war with not just force, but cunning. The turning point was the liberation of a human labor camp. The Grethan, caught off guard, were overwhelmed by an army of enraged, heavily armed escapees led by Harold himself. The carnage was gruesome, a tide of human vengeance fueled by decades of oppression. From that moment on, the war shifted. It was no longer scavenger versus scattered survivors, but species versus species, a fight for dominance that would shake the stars. The war raged on, a brutal, unforgiving dance of desperate tactics and horrific ingenuity. Humanity, once on the brink, was ascendant, their spirit unbreakable. And leading the charge was Harold, not merely a soldier nor a relic, but a symbol, the embodiment of humanity's refusal to fade into oblivion. Years bled into each other, and each skirmish, each raid, and each brutal, calculated strike carving deeper scars onto the face of the galaxy. Harold King evolved from soldier to commander, then something more, a figure of both terror and inspiration, a creature of myth as much as flesh and blood. Whispers of the undying or the demon of Earth rippled through human forces and chilled the hearts of their enemies. The war took its toll. Each victory was purchased in blood. Soldiers he'd trained from civilians fell in fiery blasts. Experimental weapons backfired with horrifying results. His once small band of cryo-revived soldiers were ghost, their number dwindling with every campaign. The woman who had first briefed him was gone, a tactical miscalculation he would forever carry like a stone in his gut. Yet, humanity pushed forward. The Grethan, once complacent, were now a terrified, cornered beast. Harold exploited their fear, turning it against them. Ambushes, disinformation, and attacks on vital infrastructure shattered their morale. Each intercepted communication crackled with desperation, their rigid chain of command fracturing under the strain. Yet the Grethan fought with the ferocity of a species facing extinction, and in the vacuum of their dwindling control rose new threats. Smaller, opportunistic scavengers sensed weakness, eager to snatch a piece of the dying empire. New weapons of terrifying lethality appeared on the battlefields, likely fruits of some desperate alien bargain. Harold faced a war on multiple fronts. He sent out his best, the ones who had survived the bunker in the initial onslaught, to forge alliances of necessity. Former foes became cautious comrades bound together by a greater fear. Information was traded like precious currency, and old battle lines were redrawn. The humans were no longer the underdog, but their fury was tempered by a cold understanding of the galaxy's ruthlessness. The pinnacle of this fragile new order was the siege of the Grethan homeworld, a once unimaginable feat and a gamble bordering on madness. It was a monstrous coalition of former enemies, bound by shared desperation. Yet humanity was the spearhead, wielding the terrifying weapons of their rebirth. Harold himself led the final charge. The planet was a twisted mirror image of Earth, scarred from centuries of exploitation. He smashed his way through the final defenses, the experimental energy gauntlet vaporizing tanks and bunkers alike. The air crackled with radiation, the ground slick with spilled blood, alien and human alike. In the Grethan command center, amidst flashing consoles and the stench of despair, he cornered their leader. The creature, once sleek and arrogant, was reduced to a shivering, pathetic wreck. Its pleas for mercy were met only with Harold's grim smile. "Extinct," he rasped, mirroring the alien's words from that fateful revival. "You should have made sure." The energy gauntlet flared, its pulse of light blinding, and then there was only silence and the lingering smell of ozone. The siege was brutal, costly, a testament to the galaxy's inherent cruelty. Yet when the dust settled, the tattered remnants of a coalition stood victorious. Harold walked the ruined world, his heart heavy, his body a testament to the cost of war. The Grethan were a shattered echo, their reign of scavenging over. The celebrations were muted, victory tasting like ashes on his tongue. He had not merely saved humanity, he had irrevocably changed it. They were harder now, scarred, and capable of a brutality born from desperation. He had resurrected a species willing and able to do whatever was necessary, not for conquest, but for survival. It was a sobering reminder that even the most righteous war leaves its mark on the victors. The future was an unwritten chapter fraught with uncertainty. Enemies would rise, alliances would crumble, and old hatreds would reignite. But Harold understood his role now. He was not just a soldier, but a guardian, the grim sentinel who would stand between his people and oblivion. The galaxy was a brutal place, and humanity, baptized in the crucible of near extinction, would walk that path hardened, wary, and forever changed.